Hey everyone, welcome to the Stash Bandit Studio. I'm Diane Harris, and today I'm going to show you a route by which you can quilt concentric squares or rectangles of quilting in the borders of your quilt. You can use this with a straight stitch, with a zigzag, a combination of those, a serpentine stitch, or even a fancier decorative stitch. So I would put on my walking foot and use my domestic sewing machine to do this. And the diagram here is meant to simulate a whole quilt, and I've drawn the borders extra wide so that I could more easily show you the route that you want to use to quilt these lines. So I would start up here in kind of at the top right corner of the quilt because you don't want a ton of bulk underneath the arm of the machine. You want the bulk over here on the left so that it is out of your way. So the quilt needle is here, the arm is over here, and the bulk of the quilt is here to the left. So I would start at this seam where there's a seam between the borders. And I might have decided ahead of time that I wanted, let's say, an inch between my quilting lines. So I would decide how I could measure that inch. Maybe I would use the edge of my presser foot. I might attach a seam guide to my machine. I could mark the quilt, or I could use tape on the quilt. There are many different ways, but I would know how far apart I wanted those lines of stitching. So for demo purposes, we're going to say an inch. So I would start here, and I'm going to be sewing in this direction. So I would secure my stitches here, either with my stitch securing function or with some very tiny, almost in place stitches. And then I would quilt down here like so. Quilt straight down here all the way to this next seam line. And then I would go 1 inch past that seam line, and with the needle down, I would lift the presser foot and rotate the quilt so that I could quilt in this direction. Again, it's 1 inch from the seam line between the quilt center and the border. And when I get to 1 inch past this seam line, again with the needle down, I would lift the presser foot and rotate the quilt so that I could quilt up here to this corner. So each time you come to a corner, you make sure you're at your 1 inch mark and you just keep quilting. So when I get to my starting point, I'm going to quilt 1 inch past and then rotate the quilt with the needle down and continue quilting around. So I'm going to go around again. It's actually easier to quilt this than it is to run your fingers straight along a trackpad. All right, so 2 times around, so now I go 1 inch past, turn that corner. So let's say this is my last pass around the quilt. You can tell I'm hurrying, so my lines are getting to be a little wonky, but you're getting the idea. So this is what's really fun. You get to this very last line, and you don't have to worry about turning a corner or anything over here. You're just going to quilt straight off the edge of the quilt, and boom, you're done. So you can see you get a really lovely set of concentric squares. If your quilt is rectangular, then you would have rectangles. You've done it very efficiently because there haven't been any starts and stops except the very first place you began. And that's always great. It's a time saver, so you haven't spent a great deal of time on this. And it's just a wonderful way to quilt your borders. Easy, looks terrific, and is pretty fast. So I hope you'll give this a shot next time you have to quilt some borders. This is Diane Harris here in the Stash Bandit Studio. Thanks for being here.